Suffice it to say, we have our work cut out for us, though, in the Senate. While this year has barely started, President Trump has lost no time in defining the year with his usual strength and decisiveness. You know, back in the Federalist Papers, they debated what the office of president should look like. And one of the things they talked about is the need for an energetic president and head of the executive branch. And I must say, that's exactly what we got with the election of Donald J. Trump to his second term of office. A president who does what he says and is willing to take, and has the courage to act decisively in the face of various threats. And of course, the one that is now looming large is Operation Absolute Resolve. This last weekend, in the middle of the night in Caracas, Venezuela, our brave service members successfully accompanied law enforcement personnel in detaining the illegitimate president of Venezuela, someone who had become the head of a drug cartel and who was working with our most concerning adversaries all around the world, whether it's Cuba, whether it's Iran, whether it's Russia or China. And in fact, Venezuela had become a hub for illegal drug trafficking, along with everything else that goes with that. And it also had become a foothold for Iranian terrorist organizations like Hezbollah. And using the money they were able to raise from illicit drug traffic to then send it to terrorist organizations in the Middle East and to threaten peace around the world. I want to say that what we saw demonstrated by the U.S. military working in cooperation with the intelligence community and the Department of Justice and law enforcement personnel was nothing short of magnificent. It gives me a great deal of pride to know that only the United States could have pulled off such an operation and brought someone so despicable as Nicolas Maduro to justice in a federal court in Manhattan. I want to thank all of our personnel who participated in the operation, hope and wish and pray for the speedy recovery of the handful who were injured. And I think it's a proud day for the United States. Was a challenging decision, I'm sure, to make, and there will be many hard days ahead as Venezuela has to correct its course of actions. And under President Rodriguez, hopefully with the levers that are available to the Trump administration and our friends and allies, they will learn from some of their mistakes and allow a transitional government which will then be able to represent the hopes and the dreams and the aspirations of the Venezuelan people. President Trump's New Year's message to friends and enemies could not be more clear. American strength is back, and we will stop at nothing to ensure that the American people are safe from foreign threats, and especially here in our own hemisphere. Walter Russell Mead put it well when he recently wrote, quote, "The operation was a dazzling and magnificent act, and the competence and the resolve that it demonstrated will do more to shore up American power and world peace than all of the best speeches President Obama ever made." President Trump has made it clear to dictators around the world that if they try their hands at making mischief, there will be consequences. And I can guarantee that the illegitimate heads of the governments of Nicaragua, Cuba, and others in the region took note of what the United States government is capable of doing if it's determined to do so under the leadership of a decisive, energetic president like President Trump. And I think it sends an enormous message of deterrence to adversaries around the world and potential adversaries like China, North Korea, Iran, Russia, when they see a demonstration of competence and professionalism that's really second to none in the world, I think it sends an enormous message of deterrence and helps make our country safer and helps keep the peace. But of course, this represents a stark contrast with the status quo under the previous administration. I think that's one of the things that makes this so startling to so many people. After all the words with no action, all the breastfeeding about America under President Biden, to see what President Trump is able to do with the incredible contributions made by the intelligence community, our military, and law enforcement has got to get the attention of our adversaries around the world. We know during the Biden administration the world had become a much more dangerous place, because when our adversaries sense weakness, it is actually an incentive for them to act. I think it's been said before, and I think it is true, that Putin would not have invaded Ukraine again if President Trump had been in office. But with President Biden, and then previously with President Obama in office, he knew that paper tigers weren't going to hold them accountable, and so they kept coming and taking whatever they could grab. That makes the world a much more dangerous place. From the first year of his presidency, President Biden signaled weakness and incompetence on the world stage, especially with his disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. His failure to secure the southern border in Texas and in New Mexico and California and Arizona invited a drug trafficking crisis that is continuing to have downstream effects in our country even today. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have lost their lives to the illegal drug trafficking coming across our southern border. And these failures, of course, do not happen in a vacuum. Our friends and enemies around the world are watching, our friends to see whether they can rely on the United States, and our enemies to see whether we will stand up for ourselves and defend our interests and our values. And of course, that shapes their actions and their decisions. In February 22, Russia invaded Ukraine, escalating a war that had started back in 2014 and continues today with massive casualty figures on both sides, now ranging into the millions. October 7th, 2023, Hamas terrorists, who are Iranian proxies, launched the deadliest attack in history against the nation of Israel. And all the while, China prepares for war. They've actually threatened to forcibly take Taiwan, and President Xi has ordered the People's Liberation Army to be ready to do so by 2027. And of course, escalating tensions in the Indo-Pacific and engaging in provocative joint military exercises with Russia. Notwithstanding the chaos around the world, America was suffering direct consequences from the drug war, as I alluded to a moment ago. Cartels in Mexico and Latin America took advantage of President Biden's open border policies and refusal to act where action was required. And of course, they made untold millions of dollars selling these drugs and transporting them beyond their borders into the United States, taking countless lives and inflicting untold misery. Now, the Department of Justice has charged Maduro and his co-conspirators with transporting tons of cocaine to the United States by moving the drug under the protection of Venezuelan officialdom, including law enforcement and their military, by providing diplomatic passports to drug traffickers and facilitating diplomatic cover for planes to move drug proceeds from Mexico to Venezuela. Iran, through its proxy, Hezbollah, which operates primarily in Lebanon, north of Israel. They were embedded in Venezuela working with the Maduro administration and helped collaborate to provide those elaborate trafficking networks. And of course, Hezbollah used the drug trafficking proceeds to finance their own nefarious activities around the world. Back in 2022, Venezuela signed a 20-year economic cooperation agreement with Iran, the #1 state sponsor of international terrorism. An agreement between two of the most heavily sanctioned regimes in the world, all designed to defy the United States and expand their criminal enterprise. In a hearing before the Senate Caucus on International Narcotics Control that I chaired late last year, one of our witnesses described Venezuela as playing a very important role in what they called the axis of evasion, a global sanctions-defying network that also includes Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And of course, Maduro was an important part of that within this axis of evasion because he's the one who gave them a foothold in our backyard, in the Western Hemisphere. And of course, all of this went on during the Biden administration and right under their nose, but they did nothing, virtually nothing about it. President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas turned a blind eye, allowing these illicit happenings to continue while drugs poured into the United States and totalitarian dictators and terrorists enriched themselves and spread their misery. But President Trump has now begun to turn the tide. He began on day one of his administration with aggressive immigration enforcement, rounding up and deporting members of MS-13, one of the most dangerous gangs in the world, Tren de Agua, another dangerous Venezuelan gang, and other international criminal networks who had set up shop here in the United States, in our neighborhoods and in our communities. Given the vast networks of these international gangs, it became clear to President Trump that it was not enough to simply send them back where they came so they could regroup and reorganize. President Trump and Secretary Rubio and President Trump's administration rightly determined that further action was necessary. And of course, that began most notably with a series of strikes on drug boats in the Caribbean, designed to deter the cartels and disrupt their evil trade. Now, by capturing Maduro, by enforcing an indictment made by a U.S. grand jury in a federal court in Manhattan, President Trump has shown without a doubt that he means business. Of course, the radical left is losing their mind, as they usually do every time President Trump acts decisively and with boldness. Protesters outside the courthouse held signs reading, quote, "Free President Nicolas Maduro and hands off Venezuela." I guess any jurisdiction that would elect a new mayor like the Democratic Socialist Mondani, you probably that's what you would expect. So I don't think anyone was surprised. But the message of Operation Absolute Resolve to our allies and adversaries around the world could not be more clear. America is back. The Trump administration will act with boldness and decisiveness. And if you threaten the American people with drugs or terrorism or any other sort of criminal or military attack, you better watch your back, because you could be next. Mr. President, I yield the floor.